Hi, welcome to this part of my review featuring the Goblin Slayer TRPG. If you haven't seen the other parts of my review featuring this role-playing game based on the popular fantasy series, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about using spells and resisting spells. But before that, I would like to talk about this channel's sponsor, Heroes and Hardships. This is a universal RPG system allowing you to play any sort of campaign, adventure, scenario. You can create any sort of character imaginable. You have hundreds of tools to accomplish that. I'm going to put a few links in the description that will take you to the Kickstarter that is ongoing, and it is in its stretch goals. You will also find links to the Discord, to the website, to the Tetsubo section of the website. Tetsubo is an upcoming setting inspired by Japan's Sengoku era. You will also find links to my reviews of the core rulebook in its early access version, the Quickstart guide, and the Wallace campaign setting, based on the life and exploits of William Wallace, so please check it out. Now let's continue. When using a spell, first you must determine if the target is within view. If they are not visible, the character cannot use the spell. The Game Master should decide whether targets are visible or not. If the character is able to use the spell, then first, the character spends one of his or her spell uses. After that, the character performs a spell use check. A spell use check's standard score can be found using the following formula. Standard spell use score equals ability score for the corresponding spell system, plus the level of the class using the spell, plus modifiers from skills such as spell expertise. Then you use this standard spell use score in the following formula to find the final result of the spell use check. This is final spell use check score equals standard spell use score plus 2 six-sided dice. Certain items may apply bonuses or penalties to the check. This could include weapons the character has equipped, items they possess, or skills related to spells. Now, when it comes to the actual casting of the spell, first, if the final score for the spell use check is less than the spell's difficulty, the spell does not activate. However, the character still spends a spell use. If the final score is at least the spell's difficulty, the spell activates safely. Whatever character or characters are targeted by the spell then decide if they'll resist it or not. Even if a character spends all their spell uses, they can still use more spells. This is called overcasting, also called limit breaking, overusage, or overprayer. When using a spell in an overcasting state, the character suffers 2 six-sided dice points of fatigue immediately after performing a spell use check and applying the spell's effects. For spells that require spell maintenance up until the point where they activate, the character suffers 2d6 points of fatigue, either when the spell maintenance breaks or when they make their spell use check on the final round and apply the spell's effects. Let's talk about critical successes and critical failures on spell use checks. When a spell use check is a critical success, you add a bonus to its final score. So long as the opponent doesn't get a critical success on their spell resistance check, they cannot evade the spell's effects. If a spell use check is a critical failure, it's treated as a normal failure. The spell fails to go off, and you don't need to find the check's total score. The opponent doesn't need to resist the spell since it didn't activate. After using a spell, a character can only move within reach. When using a spell after moving, the character takes no penalty as long as they have only moved within reach. And remember, this would be 5 meters of reach. However, if they go beyond reach, they take penalties. This penalty is -4 for traveling up to their movement speed in meters, and even greater if traveling farther than that, up to twice their movement speed in meters. Now, when it comes to spells cast through spell maintenance, some spells will require 1 or more rounds of spell maintenance upon declaring its use. For such spells, on the initial turn the spell is activated, spend a main action to declare you're using the spell and spend a spell use. After that, each time your turn comes back around and until the final required round, your character must use either a main action or free action to perform a spell maintenance check. The target score of a spell maintenance check is 5 plus the difficulty of the spell being used. When using a main action to perform a spell maintenance check, the character takes no penalty. However, if they've already moved more than their reach, they take a -4 penalty for traveling up to their movement speed in meters, and this penalty is even greater when traveling farther than that, up to twice their movement speed in meters. If they move farther than twice their movement speed in meters, the spell maintenance is automatically cancelled. When using a free action to perform the check, the character takes a -4 penalty. Other than these things, the character must perform a spell maintenance check for each of the instances spell maintenance is required. When doing so, you may take penalties to the check depending on the situation. Add all the appropriate penalties described in this subsection together. If the character fails their spell maintenance check, the spell maintenance ends, and the spell doesn't activate, but the spell use remains spent. If the character passes all their spell maintenance checks for the required amount of rounds, then on that final round, on the character's turn, they can use a main action to make a spell use check. Only then do the spell's effects activate. Let's talk about spell effects maintained via spell maintenance. Some spells require spell maintenance to preserve their effects. For such spells, the caster goes into a spell maintenance state. Whenever they take a main action other than spell maintenance, take damage, or experience any of the instances spell maintenance is required, they must make a spell maintenance check. The target score of a spell maintenance check is the difficulty of the spell used plus 5. Using a spell to deal damage to a target or area is called a magic attack. When making a magic attack, the character using the spell can choose the target. They must be able to see the target or the center point of that area. For spells with the target all characteristic, the caster can choose any number of characters and objects as their targets out of all the characters and objects in the spell's area and deal damage to all of them. Now let's talk about resisting spells. The target character or characters of a spell can choose either to resist the spell or not. If the character does not resist it, the character takes the spell's full effects. However, if the character resists it, they perform a spell resistance check. The standard score for a spell resistance check can be found using the following formula. Standard spell resistance score equals psych reflex plus adventurer level plus bonus from spell resistance. You can use this standard spell resistance score to find the total score of a spell resistance check using the following formula. Final spell resistance check score equals standard spell resistance score plus 2d6. The standard spell resistance score and final check score may gain bonuses or suffer penalties depending on the items the character possesses or the skills they are using. Make sure to factor in the effects of any items or skills that affect your character's spell resistance checks. Using this final score of the character's spell resistance check, compare scores with the opponent's spell use score. If the spell resistance check's final score is equal to or higher than the opponent's spell use score as a result, the character either reduces the spell's effects or completely nullifies it, causing it to dissipate. Spells differ on how and to what extent their effects are reduced or nullified when resisted. Now, when it comes to critical successes and failures on spell resistance checks, if a spell resistance check is a critical success, then regardless of how high the final spell use check is, and no matter what kind of spell it is, even if the spell guarantees an effect, such as halving its damage when resisted, the spell is completely nullified and dissipates, having no effect at all. If a spell resistance check is a critical failure, then regardless of how low the final spell use check is, and no matter what kind of spell it is, the character receives its effects in their entirety. At the end of this subsection, there is an example on how to use magic, so that is pretty neat. Thank you for watching this part of the review. In the next part, we are going to talk about character growth. I think that it's great that spells feel a lot like normal attacks, but magical. That is, you're still making your roll to see if you hit. the opponent is trying to resist that spell or its effects, and the outcome, of course, is going to be determined by the specific spell that is being employed. Thank you for watching this part of the review, and thank you for your likes and your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.